Phil, you recorded a podcast recently without me.
Yeah, I did, and I missed you terribly.
Somehow I don't think that's true, but I'm really glad to be back together today.
Well, me too, as usual.
One of the things we're going to talk about today with our guest is sound healing.
Yes.
And I am well versed now in what sound healing means in 2022, but you have always used sound for healing. What's your version, definition of sound healing?
What? I have always used sound healing. You could be talking about so many things.
Music?
Music.
Oh, okay. You're talking about music. I thought you might be talking about me like barking and making my own sound. Something like that.
That's actually a great point of reference because when I think sound healing, I think the sound's going to be pleasant, and you went in the complete opposite direction.
Barking is very pleasant. Do you want to hear?
No, I'd rather hear what our guest has to say about sound healing. We'd like to welcome Kelvin Young to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Sandy and Phil. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here and to share with each and every one of you the transformative powers of sound in recovery.
I have to say, though, before we get into all this, that was like the most professional introduction I've heard from you. That was amazing.
Well, it's because I didn't defer to you this morning.
Did you practice?
No, I didn't practice.
Well, that was fun. You have awesome presentation skills.
Oh, my gosh.
And Kelvin does too, don't you?
Thank you.
You've done a lot of presenting in your years in recovery here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity just to be here personally and just to have platforms just to share my lived experience with other people.
I hear you're here just because you're going to get a Recovery Matters podcast
T-shirt
afterwards.
Who told you?
I love that we're representing. You're representing with your shirt the Phoenix,
yes,
where you do a ton of volunteer work.
Yes.
Phil is representing the recovery community
I know somebody there.
at UConn, which happens to be my place.
I think I got some
connections.
I think I got some Bears barbecue sauce on it, though.
Oh my gosh! And I do have our new T-shirt on today
Yes,
for the
Recovery
recovery.
Matters.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we want to hear first, if you don't mind, sharing a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Again, my name is Kelvin Young. I'm a certified sound healer and owner of Kelvin Young LLC, which have opportunities to offer like sound healing sessions to different people from all walks of life. I go to yoga studios, wellness centers, but also go to treatment centers, prisons, mental health facilities, universities, colleges. I had an opportunity to go to UConn. So I go to different places throughout Connecticut and beyond, which I'm grateful for. But one of the most important things for me to share on any platform, whether I'm practicing sound healing or presenting, is that I'm also a person that's in sustained recovery, which means I haven't used alcohol or any other drug to deal with my own mental emotional distress since March 6, 2009. And, for me, after many years of battling with depression, anxiety, and drug addiction, I found that freedom from alcohol, from marijuana, from cocaine, from heroin, and even prescription opiates like Oxycontin, Vicodins, and Percocets. And for me, I began that healing journey in a drug treatment program within prison. And it was within that prison program that I learned about the transformative powers of yoga, meditation, sound healing, even creative expressive arts like poetry and journaling. And, I had a lot of misconceptions about yoga, about meditation, especially doing it in prison. But I know the things I was doing prior to going to prison, it wasn't working for me no more. So I had to try something new. I had to try something different. And by stepping out of my comfort zone and utilizing meditation and sound healing as a vehicle to go within, because I truly do believe that healing begins from within, I was able to find that sense of calmness and inner peace, even being in a very hostile and restrictive environment such as prison. But most importantly, I was able to understand the root causes of my experiences with addiction. And from that lived experience, I learned that it was the unhealed emotional pain that I experienced in my life, the unprocessed trauma that I endured from childhood, from adolescence, and also adulthood trauma, as well as the toxic chronic stress. All of that was at the root of my addiction. So for many years, I reached for something outside of myself to find that sense of relief from that distress. And for me, I found it in alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, heroin, and prescription opiates. And it worked for a while for me. Boy, did they work until it didn't work no more. And I got caught up in that very vicious cycle of addiction.
I'm so impressed already with just some of the words you use and the terms you use. So you said you were in healing from trauma. I can't remember what type of stress?
Well, there's the toxic chronic stress that,
Toxic
yeah.
chronic stress. What was your childhood like that your recovery seems almost remarkable? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I grew up in a very religious household. My father's a pastor. My brother is a pastor.
You're a PK?
Yes, I'm a PK, so you know what that means.
I don't, you tell me what it means. You tell me what it means.
You got one way to go and the other way.
You tell me what it means.
So I growing up in that restrictive household where, my behaviors, the things I did was always on the spotlight, so to speak, having a father as a pastor and doing a lot of community work that he did. Um, so I kind of like felt so much pressure growing up in my household, and I went the rebellious route when I became a teenager, and that's when I got involved with alcohol and started drinking and really started partying. And I have 4 older brothers, and back in the early 80s, where the crack epidemic hit, it really impacted the black and brown communities. And it really, really impacted my household, where 3 of my brothers became addicted to crack cocaine. And seeing them use drugs, seeing them drinking and partying, I kind of gravitated towards that. But in my household, we didn't talk about addiction issues. We didn't talk about, the challenges we face with our mental health. We definitely didn't talk about trauma. So my brothers and myself, we suffered in silence for many, many years, and gravitating towards alcohol, for me at first, and it started off as a gradual thing where, I used to drink with my cousins and my brothers on the weekends. Then I gradually started drinking more at, parties and school functions. And I remember my brother purchasing some blackberry brandy for me and my friends and going into the school bathroom and chugging it down and going back into the party and just being intoxicated and just so many poor choices I made growing up. And
So I want to dive into this a little bit more about the part where growing up in a strict religious, how did that affect you? So it was just a rebellion? Describe your rebellion. What were you rebelling against?
there was a rebellion for the church establishment, and I'm just speaking my truth. I've seen a lot of hypocrisy. I've seen a lot of just a lot growing up in a church environment, which didn't sit right with me, and I couldn't vocalize that, but I internalized that distress.
Were you aware of it at the time? Or
Although
did you become aware of it later?
I gradually became aware of a lot of the things that didn't seem right for me.
Can you give one example? I know.
I know.
Just one example.
I don't know if I'll get in trouble, but
Well, if you don't want to, that's fine too.
yeah, it just the things that I seen, it was just opposite of what I've been preached to, what I've been taught, growing up in a very Christian household, a black Christian church, and and just kind of like the lifestyle that I was living. That was a culture of early hip hop. I'm a big hip hop fan, and there was just so much anger within me, a lot of hostility within me, and the hip hop culture kind of like I gravitated towards that because of that, because that was a culture of rebellion for me. And I love music, always loved music, and always loved the art of hip hop and writing poetry and really expressing ourselves through poetic form the way it did. And just in the household I grew up as well too, it was, everything that glitters isn't gold, so to speak, so therefore on the outside, a lot of things look nice, in my house family structure. And I'm not trying to put down my family, my parents. They did the best that they can with the resources they had growing up in a segregated South, and come and try to raise their kids the best 5 boys, the best that they can, But there was so much things that we experienced in our life, whereas, you know, we got disciplined, so to speak, and that discipline was getting spankings, getting beatings, really, you know. And I remember times we had to, because of our rebellious nature, with, you know, 5 boys, there was times we had to pick our own switch, from the tree to get spanked with, and that was a psychological torture. And I think about it now, and that's probably be a DCF case today, you know. But those are things that I kind of viewed as discipline and love, you know. And you know, I held so much anger and hostility within me that which I went to alcohol and other drugs to kind of alleviate. Then it started affecting my schooling. It started affecting my attendance at school. Then by the time I was 17, I just ended up quitting school altogether, and that's when I really got into that negative lifestyle, so to speak, selling drugs, using drugs more heavily, and get into that fast criminal gang lifestyle.
Were your parents aware of this the whole time?
Some of it they were, and some of it, a lot of stuff they did not know about, you know, but they knew like the fast lifestyle. They knew about the heavy drinking. It wasn't until I was 26 or so where I graduated, so to speak, to the cocaine and to the heroin. But in my, you know, late teens, early 20s, it was a lot of alcohol consumption. It was a lot of marijuana smoking. And it got to the point where that wasn't doing it enough for me. And
So you mentioned growing up in the South?
my parents grew up in the segregated South, yeah, and they moved up here and in their, I think in 1950s or so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. I just think about all of, you know, the ancestral trauma, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
bringing it down to you picking out a switch to be disciplined
Absolutely. Yeah.
in a way that they thought best.
Yeah. And that has a lot to do with it. A dear friend, Nikki Myers, she's the founder of Yoga and 12-Step Recovery. She's the one that often says that our issues live in our tissues. And I find that to be so, so true. The trauma that we experience in our life, those emotions that we suppress or repress, it's in our bodies, it's in our muscles, it's in our tissues, and our cells have memory, and our body keeps score of all of our experiences we go through on this journey that we call life. And the thing that I found so fascinating about sound healing is that the sounds, the vibrations and tones and frequencies from the different healing instruments that I use, it penetrates to the cellular level and helps to release some of the stuck energy or static emotions or stress or trauma that's in our bodies. And oftentimes it's released in the form of tears, which is a very beautiful thing, particularly in a society and a culture that kind of conditions us to suppress our emotions, to suppress our tears. When able to release in the form of tears is a very beautiful thing. But in my household, my culture, and my father's a very, strong, strict man, I think I could count on one hand how many times I actually see him cry, It's a little different now. He's older. He's 87 years old now. But, way how we taught to be a man, is like we didn't show emotions, we didn't, only emotion that felt comfortable at that time for me was to express was anger. And that anger for me quickly turned to rage when I was under the influence of alcohol and other drugs. And that's what got me into so much trouble with the police and other criminal justice systems.
That connects so much with me. I was sharing with somebody this morning. I've shared it on the podcast before, but when I was coming to the end of my tenure in corporate America, I literally cried 3 to 5 hours a day for 11 weeks straight. If any mention, any contact, seeing the company logo, any part of that came into my life. And I've looked at it as God shaking me out of that place with my tears, because you can't work when you're sobbing. But prior to that, not so much the male perspective, but it was put your big girl pants on and do, keep going, keep forging until I finally couldn't do it anymore. And it resulted in 11 weeks of tears, which Phil and our younger children had to witness.
Yes.
I needed sound healing back then.
You were sound healing. The sound of your sobs.
Oh,
there you go.
I'll have to think about that.
Well, I wasn't really, I was concerned for you, but I knew that was the release you needed at the time.
Yeah.
Can you imagine Kelvin, because you've done the sound healing, but I'm trying to still imagining you angry and full of rage.
A lot of people say that now, which I guess that
It's a
attests
compliment,
to,
right?
yeah, to the transformation, you know. But I was,
Do you go get angry still?
oh yeah,
Okay,
oh
good.
yeah. But I learned to kind of honor all the raw human emotion that I have within myself, and you know, I believe that, you know, emotions are energy that needs to move. Energy is emotions, you know, and it's the how do we react to those emotions that could get us into a lot of trouble. And through practices like mindfulness and meditation and sound healing, I'm able to feel the emotion rising up within me. And through practice of these different modalities, I'm able to like witness that these are emotions, these are energy that's rising within me. Now I can react to the situation very quickly, and whatever action there's consequences to. Whatever choice, there's consequences. Or I could be mindful of that process and understand that, okay, if I react this way, consequences could be this, this, and this. But if I respond this way, the consequences could be positive too, and it could be this, this, and this. So therefore, the art of practicing mindfulness, I'm very mindful and conscious of the choices I make in my life, and really be mindful of the consequences that's associated with each choice. And so when I do get angry, always been reactive, and that's what got me in trouble. So it's a practice for me still. You know, I got to be mindful of what I say, because if I'm angry, I just feel like some of the words can hurt just as well as a fist. You know, and I just got to be mindful of how I say things and how I come across, and you know, we learn about the intention and impact and how that affects people. My intention might not be to hurt you, you know, verbally, or say something that could cause harm, but the impact from it, for what I said, could really, really cause, you know, harm to an individual. So even 13 years being in sobriety, being in recovery, living a lifestyle of recovery, I still got to practice how I address my so-called negative or intense emotions, you know, in a very healthy way that works for me.
You know, we've talked to a lot of formerly incarcerated individuals who did find recovery pathways, but most of them have kind of been geared around 12-step. How did you find yoga while incarcerated?
Yeah, well, Demas, they sponsored a Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, known as Demas. They sponsored tier programs in Department of Corrections. So at that time, and they kind of had they had like a pilot program of like a mindfulness practices. So they had meditation, they had you know, yoga, they had these different mind body practices, which I thought it was pretty cool, you know, but you know, it didn't feel safe for me at first, honestly, to be practicing these modalities in prison, because you know, we have to wear these metaphorical masks, so to speak. You know, when we're in prison, we gotta not show any type of weakness. And I had a lot of misconceptions about, you know, these practices. You know, so I thought it was just for women. I thought it for a certain class of people. I really honestly thought it was for a certain race. You know, so I didn't have these misconceptions, and it didn't feel manly to practice these modalities. But I was at a point where I needed to make some changes in my life. And my daughter, Tatiana, she was my inspiration for me to find the inner motivation to really make some changes in my life, because I wanted to be the man, I wanted to be the father that she could look up to and be proud of. And I took advantage of all the programs that was available to me while I was in prison. And the program that really helped me the most was that TIER program, because it was a drug treatment program. So I learned about addiction, the science of addiction, the impact it has on our minds and bodies, and I believe our souls as well too. But I also was able to learn some holistic modalities, some practices to deal with the stress, anxiety, and all the other types of emotional distresses that I experienced in my life. So I had to put those misconceptions aside. I even, I won't say put my fear aside, but just allow that courage to come through to really try something new and different. I'm so grateful that I did. And they had other men that was incarcerated with me. They used to be snickering and laughing and joking. Look, these cats doing yoga, meditating and everything. And it was an 8-week program. And it was so interesting that the same people that were snickering and laughing were signing up for the next class, the next segment of 8 weeks, So it just, I had to really remove those masks and not really focus on the other people that was incarcerated with me, but I had to focus on my own healing, my own journey, because I had a release date and I was going back home. So therefore, I want to be prepared to really take care of myself and really live a life of recovery, which was kind of scary, to really have that thought when I first was, about to be released back into the community. But while I was in prison, I was really doing the inner work I needed to do in order to really truly find freedom from alcohol and other drugs.
What happened when you got out?
Being in prison, being incarcerated, there's so much stigma associated with those experiences, and, I created my own self-imposed prison by kind of taking in those stigmatizing words that society kind of put on people with lived experience like me. Like I'm an addict, I'm alcoholic, I'm a convicted felon, I'm a high school dropout. All those stigmatizing labels, I created my own self-imposed prison even after incarceration. So therefore, I had to learn how to look at myself, the world, and the people in it in a different way. And by enter into a recovery community and just really connect with other people, other like-minded people, and to really understand that how do I take my lived experience of being incarcerated and how do I flip it? And early in my recovery, I never forget, Phil, when you mentioned allow your convictions, be a part of your resume. Allow your criminal record be part of your resume. It's okay. I made some poor choices in my life. That land me in prison. But while I was in prison, I took this training, this class, this program, having my certificates handy for me, and understand that I learned from my poor choices I made and utilized my time wisely. And now I'm ready to have gainful employment. And just hearing what Phil said and allow that experience of my felony conviction to be part of my resume, and having that experience of being a peer mentor while in prison in a tier program, I had this desire to really work in the field of recovery and really help other people similar to me that's going through experiences with mental health, addiction, and trauma issues to really find their way, whatever works best for them. And I'm grateful for all those recovery sobriety supports that I had in my early sobriety that still helps me to sustain my recovery for 13 years now.
I'm curious what you think about some of the changes that are happening around not incarcerating folks for simple possession and other things like that. Sometimes I wonder, I hear stories like yours and wonder about how are they going to find recovery? Because we do hear that many people find recovery while incarcerated.
Yeah.
So I'm not promoting that people be arrested and convicted for possession, but how do you think we might reach those populations who now have an opportunity to find their pathway elsewhere?
I guess one of the things for me was I was ready. I was ready because I've been in prison like 4 times. But the last prison bid, I was like ready. I was what they say, sick and tired of being sick and tired. So I was really ready to make some significant changes. And, it could be prison, where you want to make those significant changes, or it could be elsewhere. Then I look at countries like Portugal and some of the changes they're making and how the results from their drastic, even radical, if you will, changes where they decriminalize a lot of their substance is and how they kind of redirect their funds to other social programs to help people that have experiences with addiction issues to really reintegrate back into community, because we can't do this alone. Human beings, we thrive in connection. So, I kind of like neutral, I guess, on that, because I do see the impact that it has in Portugal, but, America, United States is a little different, so therefore we have our own set of challenges and things. And but I could say that I'm grateful for that experience I had while I was incarcerated. But the key for that for me was I was ready, and one thing I learned about the criminal justice system is there's a lot of traumatized human beings, and they often get re-traumatized within the criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. And over 95% of people that have felony convictions, they have a release date, so they're going home back into the community. And it was great that, the Department of Corrections here in Connecticut, they had a drug treatment program that was able to do the inner work, at least begin to do the inner work, there. But there's other places where I can do the inner work besides prison, because it still was a very hostile and restrictive environment. There still were CEOs that didn't believe in recovery, used to say all kinds of negative things to us. So it's definitely not a place to be. But I had the will and the desire to really utilize that time wisely and to really do the work I needed to do in order to heal, at least begin the healing process and really find freedom from alcohol and other drugs. But I'm grateful for that space that I had while doing it. And if I could, I'd love to share a poem that I wrote while I was in the drug treatment program that's it's called Eyes of a Silent Sun. Look into my eyes and tell me what you see. Is it a lost soul with no control, trying to be free? As I look into the mirror and stare into my eyes, I see all the anger and self-hate, hypocrisy and lies. I see resentment, frustration, embarrassment, and pain. I see jail bars and fancy cars as I cruise down memory lane. I see the feelings I repressed going back to childhood. I need to let go of those feelings. I would if I could. I see the hurt that I caused to the ones I love the most. I see my brother on a wedding day as we celebrate with a toast. I see the good and bad times that I experienced in my life, but it's so hard to let go of all that bitterness and strife. There's a sense of sadness when you look into my eyes, like the ones you see when a close relative dies. But this death is not physical. It has to do with the soul. It's that morbid feeling we get when our spiritual energy is low. It's like nothing matters anymore, like that day when I was fired, feeling depressed and weak, can't sleep, but I'm so tired. I'm tired of all the pain, the hurt, and the rain, from that cloud that keeps following me. Sometimes I think I'm insane. But when I look out the window and see the beauty of the lake, it reminds me of good times, like when I was 9 and things were fine. And with the sunrise, I can feel the presence of the Creator. When I look out my window, I see me in the beauty of nature. I'm a part of God's creation, nature, and humanity. The loving spirit that's in Jesus is also in me. So I learned to love myself and others just for who we are. And I learned all about this love looking out my window with jail bars.
How did you know? How did you know that, writing poetry was going to lead to healing? How did you know that meditation would? What was it? Something intuitive? Was it?
At the time, I was at a point where I wanted to try something new. The first time that I tried meditation, I remember when I was, we was in this group room, they called it. But when I was meditating, I'm not sure if the sun coming from the light or whatever coming in from the window, but I just seen this bright light, that kind of I felt like just tingling in my body. And I was like, whoa, this is something to this, And that was the first experience that kind of led me to do more. And I guess it's almost very similar about, getting high for the first time, where the intensity of the highness, and I wanted more. But I wanted that feeling that came over me, that sense of oneness, that inner peace, that calmness. Even being in a very hostile and restrictive environment such as prison, I was able to find a sense of calmness, and I was attracted to that, so I wanted more. And I was in a place where I had nothing but time on my hands to really incorporate these practices. And the more I did it, the more I expressed myself, and the more I started repeating it. It's just so much that was built up in my heart and in my inside of myself, because I wasn't able to express myself because of the way I grew up, the way I thought what a man's supposed to be and I'm supposed to act. And by jotting things down, there's something very magical and powerful about putting whatever's in my heart, whatever's in my mind on a piece of paper. Something very therapeutic to happen.
Mystical.
Mystical, yes.
Yeah.
And it just was just a very transformative experience for me.
It's funny that you would use those words because Phil always has a book that I refer to. I don't know if you do, but as the magic book. So it's a fancy book that he draws in, he writes in,
Yeah.
he does practical things and impractical things, and it's
Yeah.
just all that translation from head to hand, to pen to paper.
And even you just wrote a new book, and just kind of even just expressing yourself that way, Phil. I'm sure it was therapeutic process just to kind of talk about your lived experience and put it on paper or type it out and just put everything that's in your in your mind, your consciousness, and your heart on a piece of paper and able to share it with the world.
Well, thank you.
That's powerful.
Well, I was just thinking that there's so much in my head I could never get it out.
Some should
Remain there.
remain stored forevermore.
I agree.
But
As I enter the next phase of life, though, that I consider myself 5 A's, that I still want to be an adventurer, an author, and write about issues of importance to the recovery community or to life. But the one that's really fascinating now that I've been turning around in my head is to become an artist. I can almost see like a studio and me just experimenting and doing things and just getting it out. I also want to continue to be an adventurer and an athlete. And the athlete is just to keep my body in good enough shape so I can go on adventures.
Yes, absolutely. It works
The last
together.
one is still the advocate.
Yes.
That for people that don't have a voice for recovery. So we'll see what that looks like. But I'm fascinated with that. What you talked about, it really resonated with me. That about putting something on paper. It's like the issues are in your tissues that they get released some way too by writing them out through that way. The physical act of doing that, or painting, or drawing, or coloring, or whatever you want to do.
All great ways to express yourself.
Yeah.
That's the first time I heard you share the 5 A's, and as I listened with anticipation, assistant to Sandy wasn't one of them.
So. You didn't get the assistant part?
No, I'm a little bummed out about that.
But, I don't know if you know this. I don't know if you know this about yourself, but you are independent.
Maybe. So as we come to the near of our end of our time together, I was wondering if you would mind maybe just giving us a taste of sound healing for our last minute.
Absolutely, yes.
That'd be great.
Yes. So sound healing, I've learned that it is the intentional use of sound to create a vibrational environment which becomes the catalyst for our healing in the mental, emotional, spiritual, as well as physical aspects of our beings. So during a sound healing session, I use this Himalayan singing bowl. I use the crystal singing bowls. I have the gong, the ocean drum, and the different other healing tools I have to help us to activate and stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, also known as the relaxation response, to help us to calm our minds, to relax our bodies, to feel our emotions, and to nourish our souls. And the meditative sounds produced from all these different healing instruments that I utilize, it promotes healing from chronic stress, muscle tension, physical pain that we feel in our bodies, feelings of anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, sleep issues, and different other stress-related chronic health conditions that we experience in our lives. So all those different conditions that many people like myself, they reach for the alcohol and other drugs in the first place to help to temporary relief. And, maybe those substances give us a temporary sense of relief. Like I shared before, it causes negative consequences at the end. And sound healing is one of those tools to help us to eliminate those substances and behaviors and have a healthier tool to address life on its terms without resorting to those negative and unhealthy substances for us. So at this time, if you're listening, I invite you to either close your eyes, or you could bring a soft gaze to the floor, or you could keep your eyes open, whatever feels most comfortable and safe for you. I invite you to do so at this time, as we take this opportunity to simply just be. And at this time, I invite you to take a nice deep breath in and a long breath out. One more time, take a nice deep breath in and a long breath out. Releasing any stress, any worry, any anxiety, anything that no longer serves us. We ask for it to be released, and it is so. Thank you so much, Phil, Sandy. Thank you for this opportunity just to share a little bit of my experience, strength, and hope, and my truth to all of you today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelvin.
Thank you, Kelvin.
Yes, thank you.